What are the three most important aspects of stretching when you're trying to correct and overcome lordosis? That's what we're going to look at in this tutorial. We're going to look at a couple of particular stretches, but the most important thing that we're going to look at are the three different sort of key teaching points that you need to remember for all stretches. If you do want some help correcting your lordosis, please do click the link below in the description. You'll go through to my How to Correct Lordosis 12-week online program, which will take you from start to end in how you go about correcting your lordosis. Key teaching point number one is the position of the hips. Now, when we talk about lordosis, obviously it's where we've got an exaggerated curve in the lumbar spine and we're sort of tilted backwards into this position, so the bum sticks out and the abdomen is protruding. So what we need to be able to do is essentially we need to be able to correct that. So we need to be able to position the hips because that's going to give us the most effective stretch. So if we use the most common stretch for lordosis, which is coming down onto one knee and then tuck the pelvis under and pull the abdominals in. So from there, what you'll notice is I've got a straight line all the way up into this position. So what I'm not doing is I'm not going into this position and just allowing my hips to drop and come out of position. What we want, as I mentioned, that key teaching point is the position of the hips. So we come into this position, we squeeze the glute here, we tense the abdominals here, and what we then might be able to do is just go into this position and then we'll feel the stretch go right down the front of the hip and possibly the thigh as well. So when we come into this position, it's all about just getting the position of the hip right. So what we're able to do is get the maximum stretch through the necessary muscles or through the necessary area of the body, which is the front of the hip and possibly all the way down the thigh with the rectus femoris, which does that. So just a quick reminder, it is into this position, tuck the pelvis under, squeeze the glute, and then just tuck the abdominals in first and then just lean forward ever so slightly, so you should see my hip go just in front of my knee, but what I'm not doing is not dumping down into this position and just letting my hips go. Key point number two is minimize extension, because as I mentioned in the last one, that's where I just lose control of the hips. So we get that position of the pelvis and then, as I mentioned, we get that straight line going right up through. What we then are able to do is come into this position. So again, we're just taking, so if you can imagine the hip joint is here, the knee joint is obviously here. At the moment, I've got them on top of each other, so they're stacked. But when I come forward to here, I've got them, the hip joint is just in front of the knee joint. Now, you may find people, and there can be some uses for this type of stretch where you do just dump forward, maybe place a hand and push out there. There may be some use for that, but even with that, you still need to remember key point number one, which is the position of the hips. So we still need to maintain that position. So get that hip right down in and push out like so. So even with more expanding stretches, we still need to be able to maintain that position. But to be able to really feel that stretch, all we really need to do is just minimize the extension and just push it forward, because if we're getting that position of the pelvis right, then what we'll be doing is getting the necessary tension in the muscles, so we're then able to stretch it that much further. So key point number two, as I've mentioned in points 1 and 2, is to minimize the extension. Key bit of teaching number 3 is stretch the adductors. Why do we stretch the adductors? Because they are linked through the deep fascial line to the psoas and to the iliacus. It's also there to mitigate some additional sort of side effects of lordosis, which is the collapsing of the knees and the collapsing of the foot, or the internal rotation of the femur and the collapsing of the foot, to be a little bit more technical. So what we would do, again, just keep it dead simple. We come down onto all fours. Again, we get the position of the pelvis and we go into this position. What we can also do is just lock the knee, so just tense the quads, lock the knee, and again, just feel the stretch, go right, potentially from the pelvis all the way down to the knee. Some people may be a bit more towards the knee, some people may be a bit more towards the pelvis, but essentially we want to stretch right through that. If you're not feeling much of a stretch, it is just a simple case of move the foot and the knee further away from each other. So we come into that position again, just gaining a little bit more of a stretch through the adductors. So it's very important when we perform those types of stretches that we are able to use these 3 key teaching points, and also not just stretch the hip flexors, but also look a bit further away, a bit further down the chain, which would then be into the adductors, which will then help you activate the glutes a little bit more when you do the exercises. But for the stretching, the 3 key teaching points are: position the pelvis, minimize the extension, which will help you maintain the position of the pelvis, and then stretch the adductors, as well as psoas and iliacus, which is what you're doing, and rectus femoris, which is what you're going to be doing in the previous stretch that I did on one knee. If you've enjoyed this content, please do hit the like button. If you have a question or a comment, please do leave it in the description below. If you've learned something new, hit the thanks button, and if you want to watch more content like this, please do hit the subscribe button and the bell icon.